The already high tensions between the U.S. and Iran are rising Sunday after Tehran confirmed it would begin enriching uranium above agreed-upon limits. The move would be a breach of the 2015 nuclear deal. The compromise was designed to prevent the country from building an atomic bomb. The U.S. pulled out from the agreement last year, but other world powers did remain. This weekend, Iran vowed to push enrichment levels beyond 3.67% purity. Now, that's not enough to build a weapon, but it is enough to get the world's attention. Iranian officials are threatening further action, too. It is the latest development in their campaign to push back against American sanctions. Tehran says commitments will continue to be reduced every 60 days until European powers provide relief for their crippled economy. USA Today's Washington bureau chief, Susan Page, joins me now. Susan, surpassing the enrichment limit was just one component of this nuclear deal. Does any part of the compromise remain intact at this point?
Well, some parts of it do remain intact. And in fact, there are a series of steps that Iran is threatening to take every other month now to move farther and farther away from this nuclear deal. And the attempt that we see from Tehran is to either force the United States to ease sanctions or to divide Europe from the United States when it comes to the enforcement of the sanctions and the steps called for in the nuclear deal, which, of course, the Trump administration has pulled out of.
What about the Trump administration right now? Their approach so far, how might it change with this latest news?
Well, the president has talked about maximum pressure on Iran. You know, it's interesting how different his approach is to Iran, which had been seeking a nuclear weapon, and to North Korea, which already has nuclear weapons. He's met with the North Korean leader. He's talked in a positive way about the possibility of making a deal with them. His approach to Iran has been entirely different, very tough. He's given no signal at all that he's willing to modify his approach. I'm not sure Tehran thinks that the United States will. I think their hope may be that Europe will split from the United States and create some ease to the financial pressures they feel now that way.
Or see if perhaps Europe can put any kind of pressure on the U.S. as well in that regard.
Yes, although, again, the president has been pretty defiant when it comes to Iran. For whatever reason, he's decried the nuclear deal that the Obama administration reached as something that wasn't a good deal for the United States, didn't do enough to prevent Iran from being able to seek a nuclear weapon.
The White House right now standing firm on the 2020 citizenship question, despite the Supreme Court ruling against it right now. And we heard from the Immigration Services Director, Ken Cuccinelli. He told CBS News' Face the Nation today that he does believe that the addition will be made. Why is this fight so critical to the Trump administration?
Well, the president describes it as a matter of common sense, that it makes every sense to ask people during the census, people living in the United States, if they are citizens. And in fact, decades ago, this was a question that was on the census form. But Democrats say this is a political ploy that is particularly given our current climate on immigration and the administration's tough stance on immigration and on people who are here in an undocumented way, that it will prevent undocumented people from agreeing to participate in the census. That would have all kinds of consequences. It would be an undercount of the census. It would affect things like congressional redistricting. It would affect also the allocation of some federal funds. So a very big deal politically here in Washington.
And we heard the president mention congressional redistricting as a reason for this sort of undermining the legal case. He then brought up the idea of an executive order. How realistic is that an executive order could come into play here?
Well, I think we're going to find out because Mr. Cuccinelli repeated this morning the president is determined to get this question on the census form. The courts have called his reasoning, the administration's reasoning on this, contrived. They may go back to court with other reasoning. The president also suggested he can just, by executive order this question to be put on the census. That may be something we'll find out. But, you know, the clock is ticking. The Census Bureau had said they need to start printing the census forms, which I believe they've already started to do without that citizenship question on it.
You know, right now the president may be facing criticism on this and other topics, but his approval rating has hit a record high. A new Washington Post poll found 44% of voting age Americans approve of the president. And this comes on the heels of a great jobs report for him. How does this highlight a possible path to re-election for the president?
So I would say good news and bad news, because the good news for the president is record high approval rating. The bad news for the president is his record high approval rating is 44%. At a time, 53% say they disapprove of the job he's done. That is the lowest high point for any president in modern times. On the other hand, we do see the president benefiting from this extraordinary American economy. We had a strong jobs report on Friday. Fears of a recession have eased somewhat. We have no history in this country of failing to reelect a president who runs for reelection at a time when the economy is as good as it is right now. And that is what is giving hope to the White House, that the president has a winnable race ahead next year.
Keeping with 2020, the president took aim at Joe Biden on Sunday. In a tweet, President Trump accused the former vice president of wanting to raise taxes. How do comments like this and others that are aimed at the Democratic field impact a primary that is so crowded right now?
So Sleepy Joe Biden, he's become a familiar target for the president in tweets. You know, for Vice President Biden, I think this might actually be a good thing for him, because Vice President Biden is arguing that he is the candidate, the Democratic candidate, in the best position to defeat Donald Trump. And in that Washington Post ABC poll that you just mentioned, Biden was the only one of a half dozen Democratic candidates who decisively defeated Trump in a head-to-head for next year's election. On the other hand, you do have the president trying to attack Biden in ways which he may be vulnerable, but that may be a sign that the White House sees Biden as their most formidable possible opponent.
Another vocal critic of the president says he's not ruling out a 2020 run. This is Congressman Justin Amash. He left the Republican Party last week and told CNN on Sunday that he might run as an independent. Does this illustrate a divide within the GOP or their feelings about the president, or is this just his opinion and his feelings?
Well, you know, there doesn't seem to be much divide in the Republican Party about President Trump. He has very solid support among people who identify themselves as Republicans. You see that also when he goes to Capitol Hill. You see the reluctance of members of Congress, including some who might privately express concerns about his policies. Real reluctance to part with him. So Justin Amash, statement of principle here, a libertarian. It is hard to see him mounting a credible challenge to President Trump next year. When
you talk about that reluctance, we've seen that from the beginning. Is it simply that he is the president and that's the reluctance, or is there something different that's at play here?
I think it's different than some we've seen presidents in the past where members of their own party are willing to split with them, especially on particular controversial issues. But two reasons why I think that hasn't happened with Republicans now. One is that President Trump has redefined the Republican Party in his image. It is now Trump's Republican Party. That gives him a lot of strength when he goes up to Capitol Hill to push for his policies. Also, the president is all too willing to denounce publicly members of his own party who differ from him, as he's done with Justin Amash just most recently. And I think that has made some members really reluctant to take on the president. It just buys them trouble with Republicans back in their home districts and state.
All right, before we let you go, there's actually some unfinished business from the 2018 midterms. North Carolina has a primary runoff Tuesday in its 3rd congressional district to determine the Republican nominee in the special election later this year. Remind us why there's still no representative for the U.S. House seat.
Well, the longtime congressman there, Walter Jones, died in February. It's a very Republican district. President Trump won that district by 24 points in 2016. Therefore, every Republican in town who was interested in running for Congress ran in the primary. The candidate who came in first failed to get over the 30% threshold, and therefore he's been forced into a runoff. One of the interesting things about it, the other candidate running, Joan Parrott, both of them doctors, both of them conservatives, both of them Trump supporters. The sort of challenger in that runoff is a woman. You know, some Republicans have been concerned about the declining number of Republican women in Congress are hoping she'll pull through. That's one of the arguments her supporters have made on her behalf.
All right, Susan Page, USA Today Washington bureau chief. Thank you.
Thank you.